Whether it is the laughter and delight of kids playing tag on the playground, or the intensity and drive of a basketball team trying to win a game, or the artistry and mastery of an orchestra playing a symphony, play is one of the highest states of being that humans can achieve. And sex is at its best when it can embody all of these forms of play. But people can only play when they feel entirely safe. Hi everybody, I'm Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And in our last video, we introduced the concept of sex in paradise. And I love this picture because the word paradise is a Persian word that means walled garden. And a great sex life has both of those concepts. It has a garden. It is a place of sensual delight, but there's also a wall around it so that each of you feel safe enough to enjoy and explore your garden. And in this video, we're going to talk about how you build your wall together. Now, before we launch into that, I want to invite you to take a deep breath and adopt a posture of grace towards yourself and towards your spouse, because you may discover that you've been doing things that aren't helpful, which is not surprising because in the last video we talked about how most of what you've learned in the culture and probably most of what you've learned in the church has not set you up for success in having a great sex life. So prepare to find some of those things and just decide in advance that you're going to forgive one another, be grace-filled towards one another, and move forward together. The first step in building your wall is you need to have a very clear understanding of the things that make each person feel unsafe. Now, this list is going to be different for each person. And so the wall that you build in your sex life around your garden is going to be completely different from the wall that other couples build. The only relevant question here is, what do each of us need to keep outside of the wall so that we can both fully engage in sex as play? So you'll need to ask the question, what are the things that I need to keep outside the wall because I find them physically painful? Now, let me say, this might be a temporary thing because most of the things that we find painful in sex does have a medical solution to it. So I would encourage you, if there is something that's causing you pain, make an appointment with your doctor as soon as possible and get that taken care of. But you still need to know, until that is resolved, we need to keep that outside of the wall. You'll need to ask, what are the things that I need to keep outside of the wall because I find them distasteful or disgusting? We all have completely different disgust reactions to a variety of different stimulus in life, and sex is no exception to that. You'll need to ask, what do I need to keep outside of the wall because I find it demeaning or devaluing? What do I need to keep outside of the wall because it transgresses my moral and spiritual values? So have this conversation and identify everything that you need to identify, because your spouse cannot engage in play with you until they feel completely safe. Now, let me give you a couple guidelines to help with this conversation. The first guideline is, this is not a negotiation. As soon as your spouse tells you that something is painful, or something is disgusting, or something is demeaning, it goes outside the wall. We don't negotiate these things. The second guideline is, you do not need to convince your spouse, and your spouse does not need to convince you the reason why things cause them to feel unsafe. The only thing you need to know is that it makes them feel unsafe, and because of that, it has to go outside of the wall. So the first step in building a wall is identifying everything that would cause danger or risk or discomfort that would make either one of you feel unsafe, so that you cannot play inside your garden, and you leave that outside the wall at all times. Now, here's the question. What do you do if something your spouse needs to keep outside the wall is something really important to you? What if, for whatever reason, it was like the favorite thing you were looking forward to in having a sex life once you got married? What do you do then? And that leads us to the second step of building your wall. And that is, there may be some things that you need to grieve. Grieving is the process by which our hearts let go of things that they can no longer have, so that our hearts can attach to things that they can have. So if you put something outside the wall, but you don't grieve it, the problem is your heart's still attached to it, right? So we cannot skip the grieving process, because if you don't, you'll put it outside the wall, you'll make a commitment, you'll never bring that up, we'll never do that, and yet your heart is still attached to that thing outside the wall, instead of being attached to all of the splendor and the wonder and the joy and the delight that you can experience in the garden. So you're going to need, now some of the things on the list you won't need to grieve. A lot of the things you say, okay, that's no problem. But there may be one or two or three things that you go, man, this is going to be hard. And you cannot skip the grieving process. You need to go through the process of detaching your heart from that thing, or else your heart will not be available to really enjoy and build a garden together. And so you've probably heard the stages of grief before, and you may need to go through all of these stages of grief with one or two things that you put outside the wall. You may start with denial. We really don't have to give this up. They'll change their mind at some point. And then you'll go to bargaining. Well, maybe we could do it every once in a while, but not all the time. And then you may need to move to anger and say, it's not fair that I have to give this up. Other couples do this. There's nothing wrong with this. Why do I have to give this up, right? And then you may even go to depression, which is like, why even have sex if we can't do this? This is what I was most excited about. And then eventually you get to acceptance, where your heart has disconnected from that thing and you don't mind living without it at all, and your heart is completely available for what's happening inside your garden. Now, I would suggest that you do not grieve this with your spouse, right? Your spouse does not need to see how angry that you get that this is unfair, that you can't do this thing. Your spouse doesn't need to see how depressed that you get about this thing, right? It will not be helpful, and it will probably come across as you trying to be manipulative, even though it's not manipulation, it's just the grief process unfolding naturally, and it has to happen. But your spouse doesn't need to see your grief. Here's what your spouse needs to see. The only thing your spouse needs to see is that you will move heaven and earth to do whatever it takes to ensure they feel safe enough to play with you in the bedroom. And that brings us to our third step in building a wall. And that is, as you detach your heart from some of the things that you had to put outside the wall, you want to fully attach your heart to the possibilities inside the wall, inside your garden. And to do that, we are going to engage in a process of creating a vision of what your sex life would look like together if it was play. And in the workbook that I've created to go along with this video series, starting with this video, at the end we're going to have a guided section to help you create and expand that vision with each video. But for this video, here's what I want you to focus in on with your vision, is just start to picture what your sex life could look like if both of you felt free enough to play. What would you feel like? What would you feel about yourself? And what would your spouse feel about you if you were playing? What would your spouse feel about themselves? And what would you feel about them if you were free enough to play? What would it be like if you both felt very confident? If you both felt free enough to explore and try new things and risk vulnerability, because this is play and it's completely safe. So begin asking those questions. What could it look like if we both felt safe and we were able to engage in that high level of human experience called play together while we're having sex? So 3 simple steps to build your wall. Maybe not easy steps, they can be challenging, but they're at least simple, which means you can do them. It's something you can work on and accomplish. 3 simple steps. Have the conversation. What is it that we need to keep outside the wall so we both feel entirely safe? Step 2, grieve the things that you need to grieve so that your heart isn't attached outside the wall. And third, begin creating a vision of what an amazing experience it can be in your garden if you both feel safe enough to play together and know nothing dangerous is going to happen in this time. And again, I've created a workbook to help you that will guide you through each of these steps. And there'll be a section where you just process the information and gather what you think. Then there'll be a section where you have a conversation with your spouse. And there'll be another section where you process that conversation with your spouse and come up with simple steps that you're going to take to improve your sex life together and make it playful. Simple steps. Practice, practice, practice. That's what Heart Tools is all about.